Hello, hello, welcome here. Today I'm going to be talking about limiting beliefs. So, a limiting belief is a belief that you have that has truth in it but stunts growth. It's a pretty common term out there, but I actually originally heard it through my husband. Whenever I would get down about myself or, I'm struggling with something and I'd be kind of pessimistic about something, he would say, "That sounds kind of like a limiting belief." So I started to think about more of that. And here are some of the things that I've believed in the past, I've heard. Sometimes I'm tempted to believe still or don't believe. The first one is that I'm special. Don't get me wrong, I'm so special. There is no other Angela Tesluk on this planet. But some people even call it the special snowflake syndrome. The reason why I think that's a limiting belief is because to think yourself special in the sense that you think the experiences or sufferings or scenarios that's going on in your life are completely unique to you gives way to believing that no one understands you. And if that's true, no one can give you advice or speak into that. And there's nothing to learn from other people. Typically, that kind of mentality inflates your ego, increases self pity, and encourages you to believe that you're alone in what you're feeling or what you're going through. And again, not to say that people aren't special, everybody's special, but I'm talking about it in the context of thinking that your particular situation or what you're going through is unique. Obviously, the Lord made all of us special. We're all special snowflakes in the light of God's eyes. The next limiting belief is this is my personality, and if I were to change what I'm like, I wouldn't be me. I definitely felt like this when I first started dating because my husband and I have very different personalities, and every single time I felt like I needed to adjust or he needed me to adjust to how he would prefer me to communicate something or go about explaining something to him, whatever it may be. I would very quickly shut off, shut down, and, have this stubborn and hardened heart towards him to be like, well, this is what I'm like and this is what I am. I shouldn't have to change and adapt myself to you, which is ironic because to say that would communicate that you want them to change and adapt to you. So, anyways, this is a limiting belief because it communicates that you're not adaptable. And people who aren't adaptable have a hard time either relinquishing control or navigating situations that are out of control. There's always going to be times in life where you're dealing with different people, different relationships demand different things of you. Your spouse has a different personality or temperament than you. Your children will have different personalities, temperaments, ways that they would appreciate being communicated with. And you need to be able to navigate those scenarios well. It's not going to be helpful to just be like, "Oh, I'm not willing to adjust because that's just not me." Like I'm not comfortable putting on a different sort of hat to adjust, the way I need to communicate to this person. And I don't think it's about being a people pleaser. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that, oh, you should just change to make other people happy or so that you're more palpable for other people potentially. Obviously, you should still be authentic and genuine to yourself. And everybody's going to have ways that they're inclined to communicate and act based on their personality, their past experiences, and just who they are. But in my opinion, I really see it more so in light of being fluid in loving other people well. It's not about how you want to love them or how you want to do it. It's about being able to adjust, to adapt, and to pivot when the situation needs for you to love or communicate in a different manner. There are going to be times, there might be really important times when somebody who's more inclined to being timid or quiet in their nature, or somebody who's like that in their nature, needs to be more upfront, needs to be more stark and curt or loud in a sense with what they're trying to communicate. And there are times where people who have more of a strong-willed, stubborn personality need to tone down and to adjust to communicate better to the people around them. Because I think that's actually a really virtuous thing, right? To be all things, to know when it's time to speak, to know when it's time to listen, to know when it's time to be gentle and tender, and to know when it's time to lay the heavy hand. I think of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 22. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I've become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing. I do think there's a parallel here of just being able to pivot and to adjust. Again, not to please people, but to know how to actually love and serve people better. I think that's a good thing. The next limiting belief is if I'm doing better than the average person around me, I'm doing well. I think this is really easy to do. And I've definitely done this in the realms of parenting or marriage, where I see somebody who's kind of struggling a bit with their kids or something like that. And I go, oh, like I don't struggle in that manner, or my marriage isn't, in that sort of state. So I must be doing pretty well. And that in and of itself is just not a good game plan for success. Like you don't ask an amateur, basketball player how to go pro because they're obviously not going to get you there. It's important to look at the people around you who are thriving and doing well. If your aim is to have an awesome marriage and have a beautiful, thriving family, then in a sense, you shouldn't even be paying attention to the people who are not doing very well and look to the people who are and pick apart, okay, what are they doing, and emulating that in your life. I mean, ultimately, looking at people who are floundering and giving yourself a pat on the back for that isn't going to produce growth. And looking at people who don't emulate your vision for yourself, for your marriage, for your family, isn't going to propel you to greater heights. It will probably just leave you feeling content in your own mediocrity. The next limiting belief is if I'm not at peace with a decision, God is not calling me to do it. I've definitely have said this myself in regards to, oh, I don't feel at peace about something. And I've definitely heard it from other people when it comes to discerning, next steps for their life or a big choice that they have to make. And I think this is a limiting belief because it means you only want to do stuff that you're comfortable with. Obviously, you have to distinguish between the feeling of discomfort or the feeling of lack of peace versus God communicating to you in with prayerful discernment and in prayer that this is maybe not something that you ought to do. Because obviously God does communicate to us with our emotions as well to give us insight as to maybe what he'd want to do. Like those are indicators, but that isn't necessarily the deciding factor. God calls us to lots of uncomfortable things in our life. Reconciling with somebody, forgiving them, having a tough conversation with someone, dating a certain person, entering this convent or seminary. You may not always feel comfortable about going ahead with those decisions. You may not feel at peace with those decisions. And I think we just have to be careful sometimes of not having peace about a situation to be the cover up for the truth that is that you actually are just afraid or uncomfortable about, doing this or that thing. Sometimes, and I know this is for myself, sometimes I've used that belief as an excuse to do nothing because I'm afraid or that I'm perpetually in a state of discernment. And for whatever reason, I've not come to a conclusion, even though it's been months, about something that I should have made a decision by now from. And if I was truly pursuing the Lord's will for my life or, pursuing what God has for me, I probably would have made a decision already. But because I'm afraid or because I don't want to do this thing because it might feel inconvenient, maybe it's inconvenient, maybe it's uncomfortable, I just don't feel at peace with the decision to keep putting it off and off and off into the future. I suppose this is actually kind of related to the previous belief, but it's this. If something is hard for me, it means I'm not cut out for it or it's not for me. I think of this in particular to my experience with going to college. I went to a public Catholic high school and elementary school. I had 0 catechesis under my belt. I did not know who Aristotle was. I did not know a lick of Latin. And I went to Our Lady Seat of Wisdom in Barry's Bay for college, which, for those who don't know, their motto is academic excellence, and their education is of a liberal arts nature. Anyways, I definitely felt very uncomfortable going to school here. I was from the GTA. I was not used to being out in the boonies. I'm kind of like a city chick. And a lot of the people who were at school at this time, at the time at least, I think the demographic has definitely changed. There's a lot of homeschooled individuals. A lot of these people were from large families. They did know who Aristotle was. They actually learned about him when they were actually quite young. They read the classics, they had some proficiency in Latin. And so it was very hard for me. It was a very hard first year on an academic level. I simultaneously felt so much awe and wonder, and simultaneously felt like I was drowning because there was just so much that was new to me, and so much I had a hard time wrapping my head around because of just how little formation I had before I arrived there. And I was definitely tempted to drop out in my first year because of that, because I found it hard for me. And I thought, oh, if because it's hard, this is just not me. I'm not really I don't really fit into this scene. I'm not kind of cut out for it. But I realized while I was there that even though I struggled on an academic level here, I realized that there was a very precious gem that if I left, I would have been throwing away the opportunity to discover. And so what I did to still kind of reap the benefits of being at the school while trying to alleviate some of that struggle of the academic level, because it is also hard to learn when you're getting back essays and you're getting back your marks, and it's hard to focus on the good things that you're learning when you're very distracted by how poorly you're doing on an academic level. But I realized that I just wasn't quite ready. I wasn't able to grasp a lot of the concepts right away. And I knew that I needed time. I needed time to kind of absorb and soak in all of these things that I was learning because they were so good, and just needed the time to process it before potentially entering back into it. So I finished my first year, and then I returned for a second year, and I took an entire course load. That's full-time course load, so as if I was a full-time student, but I audited everything. And when you audit something, you don't have to take any of the tests and exams. It's not a real credit. You get the full course load, and you don't even have to do any of the assignments, but you get the full course load. You have to go to all the classes, but that's basically it. So what I did for my second year of college was take that as an opportunity to just purely learn. If I dropped out because the academic side was hard, I may not have married my husband because I started dating him in my second year of college. I would not have gotten as solid of a Catholic formation that I did. I maybe would have not had the friendships I have today. And honestly, I think I would have a harder time being a mom if I did not go and get the formation that I did. And so what I'm kind of specifically targeting in this belief is that, the academic side was hard, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't cut out for the formation. I needed the formation, and it was good that I got it. But if I let kind of the distraction of, just because it's hard or it's more arduous for me, be the primary focus, then I would have missed out on the larger picture that was at play here. Sometimes you have to look beyond the thing itself and look at the larger picture that the thing that you find hard is trying to achieve as a better judgment to assess if it's something you ought to drop or not. For example, exercise is hard, but it achieves the larger goal of health. Being a good mom is hard, but it achieves the greater picture of holiness. And being holiness is hard, but it achieves the greater goal of heaven. The next belief. I'm not going to be able to be a good mother because I wasn't given a good example of that. And you can replace mother with any other thing. But this belief implies that your growth is contingent on other people and that you're controlled by your past and what you were given in your past. But that's not true. You can learn to make anything in life a skill. Motherhood, fatherhood, how to be a good cook, how to sew, whatever hobby thing that you want to take up. You just need to be willing to learn and put in the hard work to get there. Everybody loves a good underdog story. And why? Because it's inspiring and motivating when you see people have a zeal and a tenacity and strength to overcome any trials despite their past circumstances or limitations. And we can be that underdog in our own lives as well. The next limiting belief is this: only those who look like me, believe the same things as me, have everything like me, are worth listening to. And I think this is a great temptation. We all do kind of put people into types or camps, and the Catholic world is not exempt from it. But I want to acknowledge that there is a truth in it. Like those who dress a certain way, believe a certain thing, whatever that might be, usually imply they're this sort of person. And I think that's natural, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I think it's kind of dangerous and small minded to kibosh anything that that person who differs from you brings to the table just because you don't align on everything that they say, believe, or do. For example, I don't want to go to this conference because these speakers are a bit too rigid for me, or I don't want to hang out with this mom because she's a little too charismatic for me, or whatever the scenario may be. I think you can replace that with a lot of different things. Obviously, you have to discern and practice wisdom when it comes to who you're allowing into your life, what examples you're looking at. I do think you really limit yourself when you're only really willing to let people who are identical to you in many different ways, and only being willing to listen to people who are like that. Because at least when it comes to different life skills or just kind of things that don't have moral qualities to them necessarily, it's not like Catholics have the market on every skill out there. How to become a better communicator, how to be a good debater, how to resolve conflicts well. Those are really good skills that we ought to cultivate in our lives. And I'm sure there are Catholics out there who do those things well, but they may not be experts at them. Honestly, for me, I've learned a lot about parenting and marriage from other Christian denominations. And I think I've had an openness to this because of my previous background prior to going to college, where I didn't know a lot of Catholics, but I was exposed to a lot of different Christian denominations. Anyways, I recognize that they don't have the fullness in terms of, doctrine or theology, but a lot of Christians do certain things very well, in my opinion. At least for the Christian people I've listened to, they do seem to have a lot of good insight of how to raise God-fearing, God-loving children or have a good marriage. And I think that's because marriage and family life is the only path for them. So a lot of their energy and resources go into that. And because a huge belief for them is sola scriptura, and they believe on just purely scripture alone, they make a big effort to parent their children in light of scripture. Obviously, when I listen to anything or anybody who differs from me in some shape or form, I think that's the beauty of being Catholic. You can you have the church to be able to kind of filter a lot of the stuff through, especially when it comes to moral stuff, right? To know, okay, where should I believe, like what should I believe about this thing or that thing? Does the church teach that? Whatever that may be. But in general, when I listen to people who differ from me or think different things from me or from other, Christians or something like that, I like to think of Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. I think that is just a good mindset to have in general, like when you're listening to somebody or the speaker kind of differs from you in some shape or form, to just focus on the things that are God honoring and worthy to think about, because you can grab insight and good thoughts from anything if you are just willing to be open receptive to that. I just think that if you're only willing to swallow information or insight from those who are exactly like you is extremely limiting to your growth as an individual and your growth in holiness. And I think that makes an individual a critical person, not a critical thinker. The next limiting belief is this: I don't want to do something because I'm afraid of what people may think if it fails. There are a few ways to learn something: firsthand experience or secondhand experience from insight from other people and their experiences. And within firsthand experience, obviously you're susceptible to failure. Failure has a lot of negative connotations, but in light of trying something, failure is just attempts you made at something and it just didn't work out. For me, I've realized that the people whose opinions I'm most hesitant of are people I don't really want to be like anyway. I don't want to be the kind of woman they are. I don't want to be the kind of mom they are. I don't want to have the kind of marriage they have. And so I've really just kind of thrown those fears out the window because they're obviously coming from a place where I'm just afraid of them being, judging me and criticizing me. But even in that, though, I don't necessarily even think that's a bad thing. Fearing, or well, maybe not fearing, but being kind of intimidated by the thoughts and opinions of others. Because usually the uncertainty comes from the fact that I either feel challenged by them because they're excelling in that area more than I am. Maybe they're more knowledgeable. Maybe they're better than me. Or they make me feel like they're better than me. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm a pretty big advocate that like it doesn't matter if I like you, doesn't matter if we align on the same things. If whatever nugget of truth or conviction you have, if I took that on, would bring me a step closer to the goal and vision I have for myself, for my family, for my marriage, potentially for my children, I want to take that. I don't want to be biased just because of my own personal pride or preferences. Like, if I want to excel in all these different areas of my life, then I'm not going to let myself get in the way of that thing. Also, so what if something fails? Or it's not even fails. Sometimes it's like more like we're even afraid of just changing, like if somebody saw that we decided to get off social media and then we're back on, or we're deciding to try this thing in our diet, or try this new habit, or do new thing in our marriage, or try this parenting thing, that if we change it, it shows that we're kind of like chaotic, that we're kind of scrambling, that we don't know what we're doing. And that like people very well might think that about us if we are kind of pivoting a lot and kind of changing things up constantly. But at least for the people in my life who I aspire to be like and who are encouraging and good examples, they affirm when when I'm changing something up. They encourage that. They think that's an awesome thing. That shows that you're being intentional, that you're trying, that you're not willing to stay stagnant and mediocre and do the same thing over and over again, but you're willing to branch out and do different things for the good of thriving and having growth. So I don't necessarily think that failing is even a bad thing when it comes to at least, trying something new or doing something new. The final limiting belief that actually both my husband and I feel pretty strongly about is that we don't like to limit ourselves to hard and fast rules. And I'm not talking about being loosey-goosey and just kind of being subjective about everything, but here are some examples of what I'm trying to communicate. For example, my kids aren't allowed any screens, or my kids can't date till they're 18, or we always do this thing on this day. These are just some like surface level rules, but the essence here is that we don't like to pigeonhole ourselves or back ourselves into corner about something that's kind of arbitrary or something that can be subject to change. Why? Because if it's something that isn't moral, I don't have to. I don't have to be strict about like this particular thing. But also, a lot of things in life are black and white, and we like to wrestle in the gray. We like to go back and forth. We like to kind of try different things. We like to quote unquote fail and then do something else, pivot, fail again, and then do something else, Honestly, I find that a really exciting part of life, a part of parenting, is that we can create whatever kind of rules and formation and scenarios for our kids however we want to. Especially you see these kind of hard and fast rules in families, because the reality is hard and fast rules are made because they're usually easy to uphold, and it's fair for everybody. And it can be harder to create a boundary or a rule if your measurement of making that boundary or rule is something like, you can date when I see the maturity in these certain areas of your life, or depending on the dress might dictate whether it meets the modesty standard of our family or not. That just takes much more brain power to judge things from scenario to scenario. And it can be a lot easier to just be like, nope, this is what we do. This is what we're always going to do. That's what it's going to be like for everybody. It's the easiest, it's the fairest, and we're just going to hold things to it like that. But Lincoln and I love the idea. And I mean, we already do it to some smaller degree with our younger children. I mean, you hear all the time that, life isn't fair. People say that sentiment, oh, life isn't fair. But especially, in family life, and then when you have several children, it can be hard to, play things out from scenario to scenario and to not just make a hard and fast rule that is quote unquote fair for everybody. But Lincoln and I just love the idea of, age doesn't dictate anything. I mean, in general, we just think age is a very arbitrary thing to use to create a rule. Like, oh, you can only watch this quote unquote movie when you're 10 years old or something like that. Well, we love like the notion of younger children being able to excel beyond their older siblings if they can show maturity, responsibility, and virtue in certain areas that maybe their older siblings don't. And to curate, then to be able to kind of change and shift things around based on the kids' growth and how much maybe they're willing to mature. Age is just, I think, an easy thing to use as an example. But when you limit something to say, yeah, to age, you say, when you're this age, you're ready. Like that's what you're also saying. It's not just, oh, when you're this age, you're allowed to do this thing. You're kind of also communicating to them that only when they're this age, they're ready for this thing. That is really limiting. That's a limiting belief in itself, and that's a limiting belief to your child. And obviously, there's objectiveness when it comes to many aspects of our faith. But even the church allows its members to wrestle in the gray, and I think that's the wisdom of God in that. Anyways, folks, that's it for this episode. Until next time.